Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Perez. I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to LibertyRadioLive.com. Thanks for tuning in this morning. It's my pleasure to be here and continue our reading and discussion of the book, The Vatican Billions by Avro, Manhattan. Talking currently still about the Vatican bank scandals and what the motivation was for the amassment of $1.4 billion. And that had to do with political and subversive activities, not only in Latin America, but also in Eastern Europe in the Pope, that is Pope John Paul II's own country, Communist Poland. And this was through the Solidarity Movement, which was purported to be a labor union, which in fact was a political organization to help strengthen the Pope's temporal power in Poland. It says, if you're following along, we're at page 273 of the book, the first full paragraph on the page, 273, the first full paragraph. It says, the word solidarity had loomed large in the secret discussions of cardinals and of the three wise men, since it had absorbed vast sums of money. Also, because another justification of the Pope for inventing, creating out of thin air, in other words, the Holy Year of 1983 and 1984, which had been, besides the spurious commemoration of the crucifixion, also the 600th anniversary of the arrival in Poland of the most sacred, holy icon, the Black Madonna Częstochowa. Now, we're talking about the Church of Idolatry. And in order to justify this impromptu and very spurious holy year to raise money to help cover the Vatican bank losses was not only the commemoration of the crucifixion, which is obviously spurious, but also the 600th anniversary of a painting called the Black Madonna Częstochowa. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about this so-called Black Madonna. The Black Madonna, according to Polish tradition, had repelled the invasions of semi-pagan enemies such as the Swedes and, above all, the Russians. As a thank you for her help, she was declared a general in the Polish armies. That's right, a Black Madonna, a painting, was declared a general in the Polish armies. She had also been crowned Queen of Poland. Okay, we're talking about the Virgin Mary here, the historic and biblical Queen of Heaven. It's an ancient belief. It predates the Roman Catholic Church. But nonetheless, now she's called the Queen of Poland. And it says, according to Pope Wojtyła, the Madonna was still protecting Catholic Poland against her current enemies, hence her having been acclaimed as the protector of solidarity. Quote, our strength is not only in numbers, for we are also a streak of lightning sent by God to uproot a tree whose bark has turned rotten, proclaimed the plaque in the monastery wall of Jasnagora. Let's pray that miners and shipyard workers find common cause under the protection of the Black Madonna, unquote. This is what the priest thundered from the Polish churches. Now, the belligerent fervor engendered by the Madonna and the Pope's sponsorship of solidarity cost money, more than envisioned by either the IOR or the Pope. The preliminary funds, some from the quote-unquote shell companies, had turned inadequate. Solidarity became a voracious devourer of dollars. Prior to his death in June of 1982, it had been reckoned that Roberto Calvi and associates had already transferred to Solidarity at least $12 million from the Ambrosiano IOR combined fund. By the time Pope John Paul II visited Poland again in June of 1983, The sum was reckoned to have reached $16 to $17 million. La Stampa, one of Italy's most respected newspapers, suggested in its June 15, 1983 edition that the Pope himself had approved the operation of his entourage when, during the same papal visit, they secreted into Poland funds worth over $2 million under the collective protection of their diplomatic immunity. See also a record in the Daily Express, June 16, 1983, a note from the author. He continues, he says, monetary subsidies derived from priestly, episcopal, congregational, and papal sources directly and indirectly, and we're talking about the Congregation for the Propagation of the Faith and the Institute for Religious Works, for instance, that's the IOR, the Vatican Bank, although dedicated to the objectives indicated by their names, were active foci for the ideological motivated activities inspired directly by the Pope, who had promised that had Russia invaded Poland, to suppress it. Pope Wojtyła would have gone there personally to oppose the Soviet action. Whenever motivated by religious national goals, the Roman Catholic Church becomes a vast political machine dedicated to the proposition that it must help not only with Hail Marys, as the director of the Vatican Bank is supposed to have commented, but also with money. Besides the established ecclesiastical channels, the providers of money are the cults, starting with the Marian ones. These have always been and still are the surest money spinners of all. The Black Virgin, here we're talking about the Black Madonna again, the Black Virgin of Poland is just one. There, the pious who want intercessions write out their wishes on pieces of paper and are put in a box, later opened by the priests. The priests then read the notes and take the money, since the pieces of paper are seldom put into the box without coins or banknotes. A companion Black Madonna, that of the Virgin of Montserrat in Catalonia, is even more successful. She collects tens of thousands of pesetas daily. Other virgins located in Italy, France, Spain, and Portugal are also active sources of abundant revenues. Those of Lourdes and Fatima lead the league as described in other chapters in this book. Recently, another no less successful cult has appeared on the scene, that of Pope idolatry. The phenomenon of traveling popes has created a new semi-ecclesiastical apparatus, specifically dedicated to the spending, collecting, and the making of money with the full cooperation of civilian and religious authorities. The image of a traveling pope was originally initiated by Pope Paul VI, and since then has developed into a veritable ecclesiastico-touristic travel agency centered at the Vatican. The Pope decides which land to visit, and immediately far-flung operations are set in motion. The ecclesiastic machinery is geared for the reception, theatricality, and management of the papal visitor. Civic organizations are mobilized and coordinated with the papal movements. The whole thing requires money, often millions. The faithful glimpse the Pope, hear his platitudes, and then are made to pay for it all, regardless. Collections are taken from the pews before His Holiness arrives, and even more often after he is gone. During the papal 1982 visit to England and Scotland, for instance, the pattern was repeated, to the surprise of those who, until then, had been convinced that papal visits consisted exclusively of spiritual abstractions. In Scotland, Pope Wojtyła's visit cost the thrifty Scots more than $3 million. After his departure, they were asked to find another $1 million for the privilege. And that, in equivalent in British pounds, is 500,000 pounds. They gave it behind subdued Celtic grumblings via additional collections during church services. In England, of the same year, the expenditure aggrieved the faithful. In the province of Westminster alone, the debt came to 870,000 pounds sterling, almost $2 million. In Liverpool, 2.5 million pounds, $5 million, the equivalent. And in Spain, in November of 1982, between 8 and 10 million. The Pope left wholly unconcerned at the extra millions of dollars debt to be paid by the parish church and by the grumbling civic authorities. Besides such expenditures, there are the collateral financial transactions in small and large scale activated by religious authorities, merchant and business people prepared to make money from such visits. In Ireland, the red carpet on which the Pope had walked was considered a relic and sold as such per yard. In Nigeria, the water in which he washed himself was sold as a healing liquid. In other African countries, anything which had been touched by the Pope became saleable at inflated prices. Even in sober Scotland, Pope idolatry reached unheard-of depths. A piece of ground upon which the Pope walked became holy ground. It sprouted in front of the garden of a Scottish cardinal, that of Cardinal Gordon Gray. When Pope John Paul II made the traditional ground kissing on his arrival, instead of kissing the tarmac, he planted his lips on the grass of the turnhouse instead. The men of the RAF thereupon dug up the piece of hallowed turf and took it to the cardinal, who put the sacred papal relic in his front garden. Pope idolatry, since Pope John Paul II, became big business wherever the new cult was promoted. While a business enterprise from which many have and are profiting, it has certainly profited the Vatican itself with millions of dollars of additional revenues. The sum of all such papal mass exposure is that the annual gift of Peter's pence has increased considerably since the commencement of Pope idolatry. From the poor $2 or $3 million under Pope Paul VI to the $20 to $25 million of Pope John Paul II. The monarchical character of the latter, with his theatrical behavior, by appealing to the masses, produced an abundant harvest of monetary offerings in the pews of thousands of Roman Catholic churches, most of which ultimately ends up in the Vatican coffers. Quote, "What saved the Holy See," commented a Catholic paper approvingly, "were offertories by hundreds of millions of Catholics throughout the world via Peter's pence and private donations," unquote. The amount of private donations was never disclosed, but it was known to have been substantial. Some Americans gave millions of dollars. This type of income is seldom acknowledged because it becomes part of secret funds. Papal peregrinations thus can produce unpredictable profits, even if at the time the Pope can experience light disappointment. Like when, for instance, during his visit to Coventry, England, after having been presented with a golden chalice, the Lord Mayor immediately asked for it back. The quote-unquote invention of a holy year to raise money for the Vatican Bank was imitated, even if on a minor scale, by others. Ecclesiastics auctioned church property for mercenary goals, like that bishop, for instance, who put on sale his episcopal throne dating about 1400 AD at a cost of $500, plus his title of baron, and another 2 nobiliary deeds pertaining to his see. But if the mercenary behavior of humble hierarchs at times can be justified, that of the papacy cannot. since by affecting the supposed spirituality of the office, it abases its status, the level of secular concern, buying and selling for reasons which are anything but of a religious character. Pope Paul VI, for all his monetary problems, never came as low as Pope John Paul II, with the latter's brazen exploitation of religion for mercenary gains. Although some might think him justified, perhaps in accepting the monetary benefits derived from his personal popularity, such as the increase of Peter's pence, for instance, and other procured from the new cult of Pope idolatry, which he had cultivated so assiduously, his invention of the Holy Year of 1983 and 84 to raise money was most objectionable. Many Catholics were mortified. Others condemned the action, which had made the papacy adopt practices of the popes of the lurid past. The papacy of today has still the power to fix ecclesiastical calendars, as proved by Pope John Paul II's spurious crucifixion commemoration. The insidiousness of its result is not only the religious aggrandizement, the magnification of the aura of the papacy and the fostering of papal political bias, but also the collection of vast sums of money under pious pretenses. The perils of the mercenary nature of such operations are carefully hidden by the spiritual imponderability of an office, which to many is or should be above all earthly considerations, beginning with the monetary ones. Contemporary papacy, for all its modernization, basically is not different from that of the past. Besides having remained dogmatically unchanged, individual popes are identifiable with their personal idiosyncrasies. It cannot be otherwise because a pope cannot divest himself of his habits, prejudices, outlooks, and biases. History is crowned by popes who have proved this. One of the most striking examples in connection with the unscrupulous use of the prestige of the papacy for the purpose of raising money was that of Pope Benedict IX. Early in the 11th century, a local potentate, supported by immense wealth, bought the papacy for each one of his 3 sons. When the first son, after becoming pope, died, the father bought the papacy for his second son. When the second son, the second pope, also died, the papacy was bought for the third time, and the third son also was made pope. He was crowned in the autumn of 1032 as Pope Benedict IX. One of the most remarkable features of Benedict IX was not only that he had had 2 brothers who had been popes, but also that he himself had been the youngest pope ever. Benedict IX, in fact, became pope when he was only 14 years old. The buying of the papacy for a 14-year-old boy set in motion several plots to kill him. One of the first failed because of a most extraordinary coincidence. This is worth relating. Plotters decided to execute the deed, that is, execute the pope, the 14-year-old pope. They plotted to do this in St. Peter's Basilica itself. Since they were not permitted to enter with their swords, they carried a length of rope each. At a given signal, they would seize the young pope and strangle him before any guard could intervene. Providence, or the devil, as it was said later, however, saved him. For to quote an ancient chronicler, quote, "About the 6th hour of the day, there occurred an eclipse of the sun, which lasted until the 8th hour. All faces were as pale as death," unquote. The phenomenon saved Benedict, the plotters having lost their nerve. Benedict fled at once from Rome, the first of many such flights. The young men, after several years of depravity among other misdeeds, set up a brothel in St. Peter's Basilica, where he himself and some of his young cardinals raped women pilgrims. He then decided suddenly to marry. The bride's father agreed, provided Benedict resign the papacy. The real reason? Probably was the young man's growing fear of assassination. Before deposing the tiara, however, that is, giving up his throne, his crown, Benedict decided to amass as much money as he could. He despoiled St. Peter's of whatever gold and precious metals there were. Since the result, however, had been disappointing because his two other brother popes had already done themselves likewise, he decided to sell the most valuable asset still in his hands, the papacy itself. That he brazenly put up for sale on the open market. He found a willing buyer immediately, an archpriest of a local Roman church. The money required for the purchase was immense. The priest, who had amassed huge funds with the excuse that he wanted to use them to repair the ruined churches of Rome, on hearing the Pope's offer, instead decided to buy the papacy. The bargain was struck. Pope Benedict received the price he had asked for, 1,400 weight in gold. In May of 1045, the archpriest became Gregory VI. If the popes of the Dark Ages used the papacy to collect large quantities of money by abusing their authority to satisfy their personal ambitions, some contemporary popes have behaved likewise. Pope Pius XII, for instance, who reigned from 1939 to 1953, abused his papal authority to make his brothers and nephews princes. And later, Pope John Paul II dared to proclaim a holy year to exact money from the believers to save certain individuals connected with the Vatican from disgrace and even from jail. The quote-unquote sacredness of the Holy Year, 1983 to 84, would have never been discovered by Pope John Paul II had not the hundreds of millions of dollars been missing from the coffers of the Vatican Bank, the Ambrosiano, and the other lay and religious associates. Pope Benedict had put the papacy on the market to obtain 1,400 pounds of gold. Pope John Paul II had put on the market the global ecclesiastic machinery of the papacy to get $1,400 million, or its equivalent, from the pockets of the pilgrims allured by its promises of indulgences. If the simony of Pope Benedict IX had been an insult against all that which was assumed to be spiritual in the Church, the proclamation of the Holy Year of 1983 and 84 by Pope John Paul II was no less reprehensible. Both popes, although separated by almost 1,000 years, had abased their church for monetary gains, one to satiate his personal greed, the other to amend the extravagant expenditures and frauds incurred by the financial and ideological misadventures of the IOR Ambrosiano. The papacy makes merchandise of the sheep. The Bible describes him that way. Now continue with our reading of the book, The Vatican Billions by Avro Manhattan. He says, in the past, Catholics were shocked by similar mercenary papal promulgations. Quote, the court of Rome is insatiable, and its appetite for money bottomless, complained a Flemish delegation of the 13th century with reference to Pope Boniface, the first pope to invent the Holy Year of 1300, with the specific objective of collecting as much gold as he could, as we've already seen earlier in this work. Not long afterwards, Edward of England, referring to a pope who, like Pope John Paul II, had invented convenient religious commemorations to extract money from the believers, put it even more succinctly. Quote, "The apostles were commissioned to lead the sheep into pastures," he said, "not to shear them." A more appropriate summing up of the spirit of the Vatican of today could have been almost impossible to find. He is indeed the fulfillment of the Bible prophecies concerning him. He fleeces the sheep. He does not feed the sheep. He feeds off of the sheep. Now, chapter 35 is entitled The Intangible Billions of the Catholic Church. The intangible billions. What are we talking about? It says the Roman Catholic Church has another type of wealth, which, although it cannot be reckoned in with what so far we have called business assets, is nevertheless as real, concrete, and as valuable as any ingot or soft or hard currency. These are the intangible, invisible, and spiritual riches at her disposal. Some of these grow daily in value just by the reason of their existence. Others are exploited through religious emotion and the hope and fear of believers. The Roman Catholic Church is the largest owner of historic, architectural, and artistic buildings in the world. Some go back to the ancient cultures or the first centuries of Christianity. Besides their historicity, the sites upon which they are erected, as a rule, within the precincts of ancient cities, are as valuable, and in addition, the artistic, religious, and national patrimony attached to them is incalculable, not easily defined, and consequently not easily assessed in terms of contemporary currencies. Thus, for instance, to confine ourselves to Italy alone, what would the Florence Cathedral, the Pisa Cathedral in the Piazza dei Miracoli, the Basilica of St. Mark's in Venice, or the four main Roman basilicas of the Holy See, for instance, St. Paul's outside the walls, St. Mary Major, St. John Lateran, and St. Peter's itself, bring if they were put up for sale? Considering that the Catholic Church owns hundreds, indeed thousands, of such historic and artistic buildings throughout Europe, it can be imagined that the wealth they represent in actual dollars is, to say the least, out of ordinary calculation. Their actual intangible value, however, is not all. Very often they house ecclesiastical objects which, because they have been accumulated along the centuries, have acquired a considerable antique value in addition to their intrinsic worth. Thus, a golden chalice, in addition to its actual gold, is worth 10, 100, or even 1,000 times more than the precious metal itself because of its historicity. The treasures of famous cathedrals, basilicas, and churches throughout the Western world are actual treasures in the most prosaic, concrete, and business parlance. Anyone who has seen those of the Cathedral of Valencia, of St. James of Compostela in Spain, of St. Anthony of Padua, St. Mark's in Venice, St. Peter's, and similar others would have no doubt that the church which owns them is a multi-millionairess in her own right. Add the numberless statues of saints, angels, martyrs, which adorn most Catholic churches everywhere. Some of them are beautiful, with crowns of solid gold, silver, and precious stones, rare pearls, diamonds, and other valuables. And anybody who's listening to this program is even remotely familiar with their Bible knows that this author has linked the Roman Catholic Church with that description in Revelation chapter 17. He's speaking of that whore that rides the scarlet-colored beast of Revelation chapter 17. It says the prices which such items would collect at any contemporary antique auction would run into the hundreds of millions of dollars at the lowest possible estimate. But that's not all. The Catholic Church is the oldest, largest, and the Roman Catholic Church is the oldest, largest, and most impressive art collector of all times. The most celebrated painters, sculptors, and artists of the Western world from the first centuries of the Christian era down to our times have all worked for her and have contributed to the beautification of her edifices. Mantegna, Piero della Francesca, Botticelli, Raphael, Michelangelo, Leonardo, Titian, to mention only a few, have all left many of their masterpieces to the Roman Catholic Church. In November of 1969, the Italian press reported that 3 small to medium-sized paintings had been stolen from the private apartments of Pope Paul VI in the Vatican, while the pontiff was at his summer residence in Castel Gandolfo outside of Rome. They had been conservatively estimated at 65 million lira, or about $2 million. In 1972, a painting by Titian, a Madonna and Child between 2 saints, was stolen, the 18th art theft from all Italian churches during that year, from Pieve di Cadore in northern Italy. The commercial value of the painting was £500,000, or $1.5 million. The year before, a painting by Velázquez was sold in England for £2,310,000, or more than $7 million. Again, in 1972, another painting by Titian, The Death of Actaeon, became the subject of a tug of war between the National Gallery of London and the American Museum. The price was £2.5 million, again over $7 million. Not long before, a Tondo by Michelangelo, which had been put up for sale by the Royal Academy of London, received an immediate offer of almost £1 million, nearly $3 million. The British, outraged by the fact that the offer came from the United States, promoted a public subscription to keep the sculpture in London. The sum was collected within a few weeks. The present author, Avro Manhattan, has calculated that paintings worth at least $1 million exist in perhaps over 600 churches, cathedrals, monasteries, convents, basilicas, and the like in Italy alone. If we add France, Germany, and above all, Portugal and Spain, at least another 400 masterpieces worth at least $1 million each are in existence. The monetary value of these 1,000 pictures is, to say the least, startling. $1 billion. Consider the masterpieces the Church owns throughout Europe. Consider the ones it houses at the Vatican itself, or in the churches of Florence and Venice. If one single small work by Leonardo was priced at $3 million, what would the other masterpieces by Raphael, Michelangelo, and the others be worth? Can any art dealer or museum value the Sistine Chapel, for instance? In an open market, this would be worth, at a modest estimate, between $250 and $500 million. Then, what about the Roman and Greek sculptures of the Vatican galleries? Some years back, the British Museum of London paid more than $1 million for one ancient manuscript. In 1972, Hans Kraus, the New York bookseller, put on sale a Gutenberg Bible, known as the Schuckburg Gutenberg, for £1 million, or almost $3 million. The Vatican owns hundreds, indeed thousands, of ancient manuscripts, some of them antique. Some of them unique. Their sale would bring into its coffers an unknown quantity of millions of dollars. And what about the contents of the secret library, the secret archives of the Roman Catholic Church? What would that net if it were to be sold? What value could be placed on the secret archives of the Vatican? Let me tell you, what is the worth? What is the true worth of that stuff? What will be left of it when Christ returns? What, from God's point of view, is any of this worth? Absolutely nothing. And worse than that, it has contributed to the idolatry of countless millions, perhaps billions and billions of people over the centuries. Idolatry is forbidden in the Bible. The accumulation of wealth by the Roman Catholic Church is an aberration that it should even call itself a Christian church. And when Christ comes to destroy that church, he's not going to save any of it to put it up on auction. Now, continuing, it says, it's a well-known fact that works of art are to be found in every major and even in minor Catholic churches and monasteries all over Europe. By the mere fact that they exist, they render the Roman Catholic Church a billionaire in her own right. And since the value of such masterpieces, far from devaluing, increases each year, the Church becomes ipso facto the greatest billionaire concern in the world on account of her artistic possessions alone. That this is not mere speculation was proved by the Vatican itself when in 1971 it ordered a world census of all the Church's art treasures. The bishops were instructed to see that all parish priests drew up accurate inventories of the works of art in their respective churches, with the help of experts, describing each object and obtaining its financial value. The Vatican furthermore warned that, quote, any priest selling art treasures of the church, unquote, without permission would lose his office and indeed be excommunicated. That the church had become aware of the immense riches at her disposal was proved also by the fact that bishops and even cardinals openly advocated selling such riches to raise funds to help the poor. Witness Cardinal Heenan, Archbishop of Westminster and Cardinal Primate of England. During the World Synod of Bishops held in Rome, he proposed that the Pope, quote, should encourage Roman Catholic churches to sell their treasures and possessions to help the poor. I suggest, he said, that the churches, monasteries, convents should see what treasures they can sell. There must be thousands of chalices, monstrances, and other sacred objects which are rarely used. They should be sold to buy food for the hungry, unquote. He went so far as to say that the Vatican itself should give a lead. Quote, there would be great value in the example of the Holy See selling some of the masterpieces of art in the Vatican, unquote. The intangible wealth which the Roman Catholic Church possesses in all this, therefore, makes her an intangible and yet potentially concrete billionaire, since the artistic treasure at present in her possession is a capital asset which is not only increasing with the passing of time, but which is and could yield far more profits than any investment in the contemporary stocks and shares of the most prosperous trusts and corporations of the world. But if the intangibility of her historic and artistic patrimony is a concrete asset, the most profitable investment in her multi-billion-dollar portfolios is the imponderability of her religious attributes. These are most valuable capital, since most of her members are ready to acknowledge her as the spiritual mistress, mother, and dispenser, and as a result are eager to part with their money, valuables, earthly riches, to gain her favor or to gain through her intercession the favor of heaven. We have glanced at the past, when multitudes congregated from every corner of Europe to Rome during the first Jubilee in the year 1300. We have seen how the pilgrims from England, Saxony, Scotland, and Ireland went to pay homage at the tomb of the blessed Peter. Those seeking indulgences gave their money to the church. Times have changed, but to think that the practice has gone with them, that is, with the ages, would be incorrect, for the practice has remained. And although no longer given such spectacular agglomerations of mass piety as in the Middle Ages, nevertheless it is yielding as spectacular a yield in money as those of yore. Indeed, more. For the fields have been enlarged. The believers, the pilgrims, have multiplied, and their peregrinations to holy places are promoted with the frequency, efficiency, and profit-yielding characteristic of the mass tourism of our century, where instead of the mule cart, trains, or walking tours of the past, the family saloon car, the fast train, the transatlantic aircraft, and the intercontinental jet plane are the means which transport the multiplying millions of contemporary pilgrims. Shrines, the contemporary Catholic scenes of alleged miracles, apparitions, and portents, are functioning with the same efficiency as the belt conveyor of the Ford factory, and with the same profitable results for the church. The consumers, the believers, will congregate upon these towns and cities to pray, to hope, to be satisfied that they too have trod the ground upon which Francis of Assisi walked, where the Virgin appeared and spoke. Who, upon glancing at the glossy advertisements of any travel agency, has not been offered a cheap voyage, return, to Lourdes or Fatima, to mention only two of the most celebrated shrines of our times? Lourdes, for instance, a Pyrenees town of barely 16,000 people, boasts more than 600 hotels. Of 710 businesses, no less than 600 deal exclusively in religious objects and souvenirs, which range from washable plastic virgins to hourglasses in the shape of Bernadette telling the Virgin how to time eggs. The water of the grotto is sold in plastic bottles, while perfume, soap, and candy are advertised as having been made, quote, from water blessed by the Pope and by the Mother of God, unquote. The shrine receives between $750,000 and $1 million a year in its collection boxes alone. And during 1958, when Lourdes celebrated the first centenary of the Virgin's appearance, the pilgrims who went there spent over $200 million. Since then, the donations and the spending of the pilgrims have increased by leaps and bounds. Lourdes is only the most celebrated Catholic money-producing shrine of our times. Fatima, Montserrat, Assisi, and Rome itself are not far behind, in addition to which there are the legions of shrines and holy spots, holy waters, and the like, there and everywhere, all receiving gifts from the devotees. Rome, of course, is still a place of tremendous attraction for Catholics and non-Catholics alike. St. Peter need no longer write letters in gold or sell filings from his chains for the gifts in most of the world's coinage now currently surpass anything which the popes of the 8th and 9th centuries could ever have dreamed of. In addition to the collecting boxes strategically placed everywhere in the Roman churches, there are the many devices which bring in ever-increasing income to the Vatican. There are certificates, indulgences, blessed formulae, all capped by the Roman rota, by the would-be divorcee. All these are up-to-date, subtle, and persuasive means which the Holy Roman Catholic Church is enriched. The author recently noticed, while staying with a Spanish friend in Tarragona, a framed photograph of the Pope in his bedroom, adorned with golden arabesques and bearing impressive signatures. When he asked about this, he was told that it was a quote-unquote preventive absolution in case the recipient should die without receiving the sacraments of the Church. It had been obtained in Rome that year and had cost several thousand pesetas, plus an undisclosed offering. This document had been printed in all the major European languages and was being sold by the thousand. Then there's the sale of holy medals, scapulars, images, and yes, even relics of ancient saints. The last named practice is not a colorful relic of the past, but a prosaic reality of the present. Although kept relatively obscure, it is nevertheless a flourishing trade within and outside of the Vatican. Whether the relics are endowed with peculiar, mystic, or miraculous attributes is for the believers to say, but they certainly continue to bring in cash. It must be remembered that a relic must be sealed within the altar of every Roman Catholic Church. And since Roman Catholic churches are consecrated every week in some part of the world, it follows that a steady monetary trickle continually reaches the Vatican. Add to this the acquiring of indulgences, some of which run into millions of years. Nothing is given for nothing. To acquire them, one has to pay or to visit the right altar or church, but one had better also leave a few coins. Multiply these holy spots by the hundreds, and the seekers offer indulgences by millions. And by the end of the year, the church will have collected additional vast sums of money. Such transactions are carried out all over Europe, from Rome to the lesser holy places of Assisi, Padua, Compostela, Montserrat, Fatima, Lourdes, and hundreds of others, all bringing money in. The believers are apt to remember the church in their wills, so that very often monasteries, convents, or other church institutions become the beneficiaries of small as well as large legacies, large or small real estates, lands, bonds, and shares. And this steady accumulation of wealth is far more rewarding than is generally believed, as any bishop or primate could testify. Pope Paul VI, prior to becoming pope, was a specialist in legacies, and in that capacity he handled millions of dollars left to the church by the faithful. The habit has become so widespread that even in the United States, more than one diocese has come to rely upon divine providence in balancing maladjusted budgets or for dispensing further bounties to outdo the bishops next door. The money-grubbing tendencies and the machinations of enrichment of the Roman Catholic Church are boundless. This is not the Church of Jesus Christ, and we ought not to have anything to do with her, but to expose her for what she is, the Church of Antichrist. And we'll continue with that tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow.